The mountains don't forgive weakness. That's a lesson I learned a long time ago, way back before I ever set foot in these woods. I learned it inside a 6x8 concrete cell, surrounded by men who would cut your throat for a pack of cigarettes. Behind the wire, they say man is a wolf to man. That's a lie. Wolves have loyalty. Wolves have a pack. In prison, a man is just spare parts, disposable. But the high country, the wilderness is honest. It doesn't lie to you. Cold is cold. Hunger is hunger. If you survive, it's because you were strong enough, smart enough. If you die, it's your own damn fault. No judge, no jury, just the wind and the snow. My name is Frank Colton. I'm 54 years old. 8 of those years I spent in the Deer Lodge State Penitentiary for a murder I didn't commit. For the last 2 years, I've been living up here in a cabin tucked away in the darker folds of the Bitterroot Range, 70 miles from the nearest paved road, 70 miles from what people call civilization. And I've never been happier. It was late November, that heavy, silent time when the mountains hold their breath right before the hammer drops and the real deep freeze sets in. I was making my way back from the upper ridge, checking the Martin line. The pack on my back had a good weight to it. 3 prime furs. Dark, thick winter coats. That would trade well down at the post. Enough for a 50-pound sack of flour, coffee, and maybe a fresh box of .30-30-30 rounds for the Winchester. The snow was dry and powdery, screaming under my snowshoes loud enough to wake the dead. The temperature was dropping fast, probably hitting 25 below zero already. Even through my wool scarf, I could feel the air biting at my cheeks like broken glass. My fingers were starting to numb inside my elk-hide mittens, that familiar dull ache that tells you to keep moving or die. I was about 2 miles from the cabin when I saw them. At first, I didn't believe my eyes. I blinked, rubbing ice from my eyelashes. In this part of the world, you see elk tracks, wolf prints, maybe a mountain lion if you're lucky, or unlucky. But these were wrong. They weren't animal tracks, and they sure as hell weren't hunters' tracks. No snowshoes, no deep-tread winter boots. Just smooth, narrow holes punched into the deep powder. Someone had been walking out here in street shoes. Walking and falling. I could see the drag marks where they had stumbled, crawled, and forced themselves up again. I stopped, pulling the scarf down from my mouth. I listened. Nothing but the whistle of the wind through the lodgepole pines and the distant crack of a branch giving way under the snow load. The tracks veered off my trail, heading down toward a ravine that in the summer is a trout stream, but right now was just a deadly trap filled with 6 feet of drift. Not my problem, I told myself. My voice sounded rusty in the thin air. Turn around, Frank. Go home. Stoke the fire. But I didn't turn around. I cursed under my breath, shifted the weight of my pack, and followed the trail. It took me 30 minutes to find her. She was curled up under the low-hanging branches of a massive blue spruce half buried in the drift. At first glance, I thought she was a corpse. Just another frozen shape in a landscape of white. I knelt beside her, brushing the snow from her face. A woman. Maybe 40, maybe a little older. It was hard to tell with the frost masking her features. Her lips were blue, her skin the color of old wax. I looked at her clothes and shook my head. She was wearing a city coat. Expensive wool, stylish, probably cost $1,000 in a boutique in Seattle or Missoula. Out here, it was about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. She had leather boots with heels. A leather purse was strapped across her chest, her frozen fingers still clutching it like a lifeline. I pulled off my mitten and pressed my ear to her chest, right over the heart. Thump, thump. Faint, erratic. But there. Damn fool city girl, I grumbled. I stood up and made a choice. I unbuckled my pack. The 3 marten furs, my flour, my coffee, my ammo, I tossed them into the snow. I couldn't carry both, and the furs would weigh me down. I'd come back for them tomorrow if the wolves didn't get them first. If they did, well, that's just the tax you pay to the mountain. I kicked off my snowshoes, too. Carrying 50 pounds of dead weight and deep powder is impossible with them on. I'd have to post-hole it back, step by agonizing step. I hoisted her up. She was light, maybe 110 pounds, but in this cold, dead weight feels like lead. Her head lolled onto my shoulder, ice crystals in her hair scratching my neck. The trek back to the cabin took me nearly 2 hours. It was a brutal slog. My thighs burned, my lungs felt like I was breathing razor blades. Every 100 yards I had to stop, leaning against a tree, checking to see if she was still breathing. She was, but barely. A rasping, shallow sound like a saw cutting through dry wood. When I finally kicked the cabin door open, the rush of heat almost knocked me over. I had stoked the cast-iron stove before I left that morning, and the embers were still glowing red, keeping the inside a solid 50 degrees. I laid her down on the cot near the stove. The smell of pine resin and wood smoke filled the room. The smell of home. Work mode kicked in. Panic is for amateurs. I stripped off her wet, frozen coat, pulled off those ridiculous boots. Her feet were marble white, toes stiff, frostbite. "Come on now," I muttered, working fast. If I rubbed them, I'd destroy the tissue. I grabbed a handful of snow from the bucket near the door to gently bring the temperature up, then switched to a dry wool cloth. I wrapped her in my spare buffalo robe, heavy, coarse, and warmer than anything synthetic. I threw 3 split logs into the stove, opened the damper to get the fire roaring, and set the kettle on top. Only then, when the kettle started to whistle, did I light the kerosene lamp on the table. The yellow light flooded the room, chasing away the shadows. I turned to check her face, and that's when my heart stopped. I froze. My hand hovered over the lamp, trembling. Not from the cold, from a sudden blinding rage that surged up from my gut. I knew that face. I knew those thin lips, those high cheekbones, that small scar above her left eyebrow. I knew them because I had stared at them with pure hatred for 8 years. Every night in my cell, staring at the ceiling, I had pictured this face. Sarah Miller. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Miller. The woman who stood in a courtroom, pointed a finger at me, and sent me to hell. I stood over her, my fists clenching and unclenching. Here she was, helpless, half dead, the woman who destroyed my life, the reason my wife stopped writing after 2 years, the reason my daughter grew up without a father and doesn't even know who I am anymore. The universe has a twisted sense of humor. It would be so easy. I didn't even have to touch her. I could just pick her up, walk to the door, and put her back outside. Or even simpler, just open the door and let the fire go out. By morning, the cold would finish what it started. No one would ever know. The snow covers everything. I stood there for a long time, 1 minute, 5, 10. The kettle was screaming now, a high-pitched shriek demanding attention. I cursed through my teeth, snatched the kettle off the stove, and slammed it onto a wooden trivet. I poured the boiling water into a tin cup, threw in a handful of dried sage and herbs. I sat down on the stool by the fire, listening to the wind howl outside. The storm had finally hit. I asked the darkness. The darkness didn't answer. But something else did. That nagging little voice in the back of my head, the one that got me into trouble in the first place. "You're not a killer, Frank," the voice said. It sounded like my mother. "You never were. Don't become one now." I took a sip of the scalding tea. It tasted bitter. "To hell with you," I said to the unconscious woman on my cot. "You live. But when you wake up, you and I are going to have a reckoning." She didn't wake up for 2 days. For 48 hours, the blizzard raged outside, burying the cabin under 4 feet of fresh powder. The wind hit the logs like a battering ram, shaking the whole structure, but the cabin held. I built it myself, notched every log, chinked the gaps with moss and clay. It wasn't pretty, but it was strong. Inside, time dissolved into a routine of survival. Keep the stove fed, melt snow for water, change the compresses on her feet. I forced warm broth between her blue lips, venison stock I'd made from a buck I took down in October. I watched her swallow reflexively, her body fighting to live even while her mind was checked out. I sat in the rocking chair with my whittling knife, carving a new trigger mechanism for a snare, and I watched her. 10 years ago, she looked different, younger, sharper. I closed my eyes and I was back there. The Missoula County Courthouse. The air smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights hummed like angry hornets. She was standing at the prosecution table. A tailored charcoal suit, hair pulled back in a tight bun that looked painful. Her eyes were gray, cold, and empty of anything resembling mercy. Her voice was flat, professional, stripping away my life sentence by sentence. The state will prove that the defendant, Frank Colton, acted with malice and premeditation in the murder of Pete Reynolds. Pete Reynolds. My best friend since kindergarten. We played high school football together, worked the logging crews together. Pete was the brother I never had. And then he got mixed up with the wrong people, local toughs, shadowy fixers from out of state. He started drinking, started looking over his shoulder. That night, he called me. "Frank, I need you. Sawmill on Route 9, it's bad, bring your truck." I went. Of course I went. You don't ask questions when a brother calls. I found him in the office of the abandoned mill, 2 rounds in the chest. He was already drowning in his own blood when I got there. I tried to plug the holes, tried to start CPR. I was covered in his blood when the sirens wailed. The sheriff's deputies didn't even ask what happened. They just threw me against the hood of my truck. "We found the weapon in your glove box, Mr. Colton," she had said in court, holding up the bag with the .38 revolver. "Ballistics match, fingerprints match, motive, a gambling debt Mr. Reynolds owed the defendant." Lies. All of it. The gun was planted. The debt was fabricated. I screamed it from the stand. I begged them to check the security cameras across the street. I begged them to look at the tire tracks. Sarah Miller just looked at me with those gray eyes, adjusted her glasses, and said, "Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is grandstanding." 8 years. 8 years in a cage because she was too ambitious to look for the truth or too corrupt to care. I opened my eyes. The fire popped, snapping me back to the present. Here she was, the architect of my destruction. Lying on my cot, wrapped in my buffalo robe, vulnerable as a newborn. On the second night, she opened her eyes. I was sitting by the stove, sharpening my knife on a whetstone. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound was rhythmic, hypnotic. I heard a rustle and looked up. She was staring at me. At first, there was just confusion. Then the fog cleared, and I saw the recognition hit her like a physical blow. Her pupils dilated. "You," she rasped. Her voice was a broken whisper. "Our Frank Colton," I said, not stopping the knife. "In the flesh." She flinched, trying to scramble backward, trying to get up. She let out a cry of agony and collapsed back onto the pillow. "Stay down," I said, my voice low and level. "Frostbite. Your feet are a mess. You try to walk on them now, you'll tear the tissue, then gangrene sets in, and if that happens..." I held up the knife, testing the edge with my thumb. "I don't have any anesthesia out here, counselor. I'll have to take them off with a wood saw and cauterize the stumps with a hot iron." She stared at me in pure horror. To her, I wasn't a rescuer. I was a ghost, a nightmare come to life to collect a debt. I set the knife down and stood up. She tracked my movement like a trapped animal watching a predator. I asked. She didn't answer. She just kept drilling holes in me with those eyes. I chuckled darkly. Don't worry. If I wanted to kill you, I've had 2 days to do it. Hell, I could have just left you under that tree. Saved me the firewood. 2 days? She whispered. You were out cold. Hypothermia. I poured the dark herbal brew into a tin cup and held it out. Drink. Sage and willow bark. It helps with the pain. She took the cup with trembling hands. She took a sip and grimaced. We sat in silence for a long time. The wind howled around the corners of the cabin. Why? She finally asked. Why what? Why did you save me? I leaned back, crossing my arms. I've been asking myself that same question. Maybe I'm just an idiot. You hate me. Hate. I nodded slowly. Yeah, I hate you. Every day for 10 years. Every night in prison I fell asleep imagining this moment. What I'd say. What I'd do. She went pale. Paler than the frostbite had made her. And? What were you going to do? I looked her dead in the eye. A lot of things. But that was back in civilization. This is the high country, different rules up here. I pointed to the window. Out there you die alone. In here nobody dies unless it's necessary. She flinched again as if I'd slapped her. Colton, Frank, it's Mr. Colton to you, I snapped. Mr. Colton. She took a breath, her voice gaining a little strength. I need to tell you something. Something important. But before she could finish, her eyes rolled back. The cup slipped from her fingers, clattering onto the floor. I caught it before it spilled, swearing under my breath. She was out again. The fever was spiking. Her body was fighting the shock. She muttered something in her delirium, tossing her head from side to side. The drive, she mumbled. They're going to kill them all. The drive. Hide it. I straightened up. I looked at her purse. I had tossed it into the corner 2 days ago and hadn't touched it since. I'm not a thief. But she was delirious and she was scared. I picked up the leather bag. It was heavy. Expensive leather, Italian maybe. Inside, a wallet full of credit cards, a smartphone that was dead as a doornail, keys to a luxury car, and a small velvet pouch, the kind used for jewelry. I opened the pouch. Inside was a standard USB flash drive. Black. 64 gigabytes. I turned it over in my calloused fingers. What did you dig up, Sarah? I whispered. And who is they? I looked at the window. The storm was breaking. The wind had died down. But in the sudden silence, I heard something else. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. A sound I hadn't heard in these parts for years. The revving of high-performance engines. Snowmobiles. Not one. 3 or 4. I walked to the window and peered through the crack in the shutters. The clouds were parting, revealing a cold, indifferent moon. On the ridgeline, about 2 miles out, I saw the headlights. Tiny pinpricks of light moving in a tactical formation against the dark tree line. They were coming. I looked back at the unconscious woman, then at the flash drive in my hand. I told myself, checking the load in my Winchester. Quote 46. The storm broke just before dawn. I stood on the porch watching the sun bleed over the jagged peaks of the Bitterroots. The sky was a hard, polished blue, innocent of the violence it had unleashed the night before. It was 30 below zero. The air was so crisp it felt like inhaling broken glass. The snowmobiles I had seen the night before hadn't reached us yet. The deep powder in the ravine likely slowed them down, or maybe they camped out to wait for daylight. But they were coming. I could feel it in my bones, the same way an old dog feels a drop in pressure before a thunderstorm. I went back inside. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and bacon grease. I was frying up thick slabs of cured pork and reheating a pot of oatmeal with dried huckleberries. Simple food, but it sticks to your ribs. She was awake. Sarah sat up on the cot, her back against the rough log wall. She looked like a ghost, hollow cheeks, dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was clear. The fever had broken. She was watching me with the wary intensity of a cornered fox. Quote 47, she said. Her voice was scratchy, like sandpaper on stone. I turned, skillet in hand. I ladled the oatmeal into a tin bowl, dropped 2 slices of bacon on top and handed it to her. She ate ravenously, her hands shaking, shoveling the food in as if she hadn't eaten in a week, which, considering her trek, was probably close to the truth. I sat across from her at the small pine table. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the black USB drive. I set it on the wood between us with a soft click. She froze, the spoon halfway to her mouth. She said, I poured myself coffee, black and bitter. She put the bowl down slowly. She stared at the drive, then at me. She said quietly. She took a deep breath, wincing as if her ribs hurt. Quote 56. I snorted. Quote 57. Quote 58. She leaned forward, her gray eyes darkening. I knew that term. Every rural county has them. The guys who meet at the Elks Lodge, drink bourbon, and decide who gets the permits and who gets the fines. But this sounded different. She continued, reading my expression. The cabin went silent. A log shifted in the stove with a loud crack. Quote 64, I asked. Quote 65, she named him. Quote 66, she hesitated. Quote 67, I stiffened. Quote 68, quote 69. She looked at me, her eyes wet. Quote 70. My grip tightened on my coffee cup until the tin bent. Quote 71, she said softly. Quote 72, quote 73, quote 74. I felt the blood drain from my face. Pete, my dumb, loyal friend Pete. He was a bagman for dirty cops, Sarah said. I whispered. The rage was cold now, solid as ice. Quote 78. Her voice cracked. Quote 79, quote 80, quote 81, quote 82, I said. Quote 83, quote 84, she wiped a tear from her cheek. Quote 85. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was higher now, casting long blue shadows across the snow. Sheriff Bull Higgins. I pictured the man, a mountain of slab muscle and arrogance, usually seen with a cigar clamped between his teeth and a pearl-handled .45 on his hip. He was the law in this county, untouchable. And now, he was coming here. I asked, not turning around. She swallowed hard. Quote 88. I turned back to her. Quote 89. I walked to the gun rack on the wall. I took down the Winchester Model 94. The lever action was smooth, worn silver by years of use. I checked the tube magazine, full. I grabbed a box of .30 rounds from the shelf and tossed them onto the table. Then I pulled a heavy canvas rucksack from under the bunk. I asked. I said, quoting the Marine Corps drill instructor who had screamed in my face 30 years ago. Quote 93. I threw a pair of thick wool socks and my spare boots at her. They were 3 sizes too big, but they were dry. Quote 94. Quote 95. Panic flared in her eyes. Quote 96. Quote 97. I said, shoving a medical kit, jerky, and a coil of rope into the pack. Quote 98. Quote 99. I looked at her. For the first time, I didn't see the prosecutor. I just saw a woman who was scared out of her mind but had still tried to do the right thing, even if it was 10 years too late. They won't catch us, I said. I picked up the flash drive and zipped it into the breast pocket of my flannel shirt, right next to my heart. Because this isn't a courtroom, Sarah. There are no objections here, no juries, just the mountain. I jacked around into the chamber of the Winchester. Clack, clack. And on this mountain, I said, I'm the judge. Suddenly the silence outside was shattered. not by the wind. Crack. The window pane next to my head exploded inward. A spray of glass shards showered the table. I tackled Sarah, driving her to the floor just as a second bullet punched a hole through the log wall where her head had been a second ago. "Get down!" I roared, dragging her behind the cast-iron stove. Outside, the roar of engines grew louder. Screaming engines. "They're here!" I gritted out, checking the sight lines. "And they didn't come to talk." The cabin was disintegrating around us. Another round punched through the chinking between the logs, sending a spray of dried moss and clay into the air. A ceramic mug on the shelf exploded. The air filled with the sharp metallic tang of cordite and the dry dust of pulverized wood. "Stay down!" I roared, pushing Sarah's head lower behind the cast-iron stove. The stove was a monstrosity of black iron weighing nearly 400 pounds. It was the only thing in the room capable of stopping a high-velocity rifle round. I army-crawled to the edge of the woodpile, risking a glance through the shattered window. 2 shooters, maybe 3. They were positioning themselves in a crossfire pattern. One was prone on the ridge, laying down suppression fire. The other 2 were moving in, bounding from tree to tree. Professional movement. These weren't deputized drunks, these were operators. Thwack. A bullet buried itself in the floorboards inches from my hand. Quote, 108. Sarah screamed, her hands covering her ears. Quote, 109. I grunted. I rolled onto my back and checked the Winchester. 6 rounds in the tube, 1 in the chamber, not enough for a firefight against semi-automatic carbines. Quote, 110, I said. Quote, 111. Quote, 112. Quote, 113. I looked at the floor rug made of braided rags. Quote, 114. She stared at me, paralyzed by fear. Quote, 115. She scrambled over, dragging the heavy rug aside. Beneath it was a trap door, flush with the floorboards. A root cellar. Most cabins up here have them for keeping potatoes and venison cool in the summer. Quote, 116. I ordered. Quote, 117. Quote, 118. I lied, or half-lied. Quote, 119. I shoved her toward the hole. She lowered herself into the dark, damp space. I was about to follow when the front door exploded inward. A boot hit the lock with tremendous force, splintering the frame. A figure filled the doorway. Big man, black tactical gear, balaclava, an AR-15 with a holographic sight raised to his shoulder. He didn't see me at first. He saw the empty room, the overturned table. He stepped inside, sweeping the muzzle left. I didn't hesitate. I was crouched behind the wood box, the Winchester already leveled. Boom! The 30-30 is an old cartridge, a cowboy round. People think it's obsolete, but at close range, a 170-grain soft-point bullet hits like a sledgehammer. The round caught him center mass, right in the ceramic plate of his body armor. It didn't penetrate, but the kinetic energy lifted him off his feet and slammed him back against the doorframe. The wind was knocked out of him. I worked the lever. Clack, clack. Before he could recover, I put the second round into his thigh, just below the armor. He screamed and went down, his rifle clattering across the floor. I sprinted forward, ignoring the pain in my bad knee. I kicked the rifle away and drove the butt of the Winchester into his temple. He went limp. "One down," I muttered. I quickly patted him down. A Glock 17 on his hip. I took it. A radio on his vest. I took that too. And a spare magazine for the AR, though I left the rifle. Too bulky. Bullets were still shredding the windows. The sniper on the ridge hadn't stopped. I dove into the root cellar and pulled the trapdoor shut above me, sliding the heavy bolt I'd installed on the inside. Darkness. The smell of earth and raw potatoes. Quote, 121. Sarah's voice was trembling in the dark. Quote, 122. I clicked on a small pen light. Quote, 123. Quote, 124. Quote 125. I had built this cabin with an escape route. Paranoia? Maybe. But when you've been framed by the law, you stop trusting doors that only lock from one side. I squeezed past her and kicked the bottom log of the foundation. It was hinged on steel pins. It swung outward, revealing a narrow crawl space that led under the porch and out into the snow on the blind side of the cabin. Quote 126. I hissed. Quote 127. We belly crawled into the biting cold. The snow was deep here, drifted against the logs. The shooting had stopped. The bad guys were probably regrouping, wondering why the guy who breached the door hadn't radioed in. The shed was 20 yards away, 20 yards of open ground. On my signal, I whispered. Run for the shed door, don't look back, don't zigzag, just run. What about you? I'm right behind you. Go! She bolted. A shout from the trees. Contact, rear of the structure. Bullets kicked up geysers of snow around her feet. Zip, zip, crack. I raised the Winchester and fired 2 shots blindly toward the tree line to keep their heads down. Then I ran. I hit the shed door shoulder first, tumbling inside and dragging Sarah down with me. I slammed the door and dropped the heavy wooden bar across it. The shed was dark, smelling of gasoline and 2-stroke oil. In the center sat Nub the Beast. It was a 1998 Ski-Doo Skondik, not a recreational toy, a workhorse, wide-track, utilitarian, ugly as sin and tough as a tank. Get on the back, I ordered, holstering the Winchester in the leather scabbard attached to the cowling. I grabbed the starter cord. Please. It was 30 below. Engines hate the cold. If this didn't start in 3 pulls, we were dead. I primed the carburetor. Once, twice. I ripped the cord. The engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Quote 135. Sarah whimpered. Bullets started punching through the thin plywood walls of the shed. Shafts of sunlight pierced the gloom as holes appeared around us. Quote 136. I growled at the machine. I ripped the cord again, harder. Rrr, chug, chug, chug. Blue smoke erupted from the exhaust. The engine caught, idling with a rough, aggressive growl. Quote 137. I shouted over the noise. I didn't wait for them to breach the door. I threw the transmission into forward and gunned the throttle. Crash. We didn't use the door. I drove the snowmobile straight through the back wall of the shed. The rotted wood exploded outward, and we flew into the blinding white of the afternoon. The sudden exit caught them off guard. We were already 50 yards out, tearing across the meadow toward the tree line, before the first shots followed us. I looked back. 3 men were running from the cabin toward their own sleds. Modern machines. Fast. Agile. Quote 138. Sarah yelled, clinging to my waist. Quote 139. I yelled back, leaning into the turn as we hit the first line of trees. Quote 140. I looked at the radio I had stolen. It crackled to life. Quote 141. I recognized the voice. Even distorted by the radio static, that arrogant drawl was unmistakable. Sheriff Bull Higgins. I pulled the radio from my pocket and pressed the transmit button. Quote 142. I shouted into the wind. Silence on the other end. Then, quote 143. Quote 144. I snarled. Quote 145. I clicked the radio off and shoved it back in my pocket. We hit the deep timber. The world narrowed down to the roar of the engine and the blur of pine trees whipping past. The chase was on. The good old boys were fast, I'll give them that. Their machines were modern, long-track mountain sleds with high-output engines, probably 800 cubic centimeters or more. On the open meadows, they ate up the distance between us like it was nothing. I could hear the angry whine of their motors getting louder, a high-pitched hornet buzz over the tractor-like chug of my old Skondik. "They're gaining!" Sarah screamed, burying her face in my back to shield it from the biting wind. "Not for long," I yelled back. Speed is great on the flats, but in the timber, speed kills. I yanked the handlebars hard to the left, diving off the logging road and straight into a dense stand of lodgepole pine. This was the Narrows, a section of forest where the trees grew so thick you couldn't spread your arms without touching bark. My Skandik was a tank, heavy, wide, and slow. But it was built to bulldoze through deep powder and brush. Their sleds were built for speed and high marking. In here they were nervous. I wove between the trunks the skis of the snowmobile scraping bark. I heard a crash behind us, the sickening crunch of plastic and metal hitting wood at 40 miles an hour. One down, but the others were still coming. I could see their headlights dancing through the trees, sweeping back and forth like searchlights. And then, the mountain decided to intervene. It didn't start gradually. It hit us like a wall. The whiteout. 1 minute I could see 50 yards ahead. The next, the world simply vanished. The wind picked up with a roar that drowned out even the engines. The snow wasn't falling down. It was driving sideways, hard pellets that stung like birdshot. Visibility dropped to 0. I couldn't see the trees. I couldn't even see the front of my own snowmobile. I slammed on the brakes. The Skandik skidded to a halt, sinking into a fresh drift. Sarah cried, her voice barely audible over the gale. Quote, 151, I shouted, grabbing her shoulder. Quote, 152. Quote, 153. Quote, 154. I dragged her off the machine. The cold was instant and brutal. It stripped the heat from our bodies in seconds. This wasn't just winter, this was a killer freeze, dropping to 40 below with the wind chill. Here, I pointed to a massive Douglas fir nearby. Its lower branches swept all the way to the ground, creating a natural tent, a tree well where the snow was shallower. I pulled the axe from my belt and started hacking at the lower limbs, piling them up to create a windbreak on the exposed side. I moved with manic energy. Panic is death. Action is life. Get inside, I ordered Sarah. Clear a space near the trunk. Get down to the needles. She crawled in, shivering so hard her teeth rattled like dice in a cup. I dragged the saddlebags off the sled, sleeping bag, tarp, emergency rations, and dove in after her. I pulled the heavy canvas tarp over the opening and weighted it down with snow. Inside, the roar of the wind was muffled to a dull, terrifying drone. It was dark, smelling of pine resin and wet wool. I clicked on my penlight. Sarah was curled into a ball, shaking uncontrollably. Hypothermia was setting in again. The sleeping bag, I said, unrolling it. It was a heavy military surplus mummy bag. Good for one person, tight for two. Get in. What? Get in the bag, Sarah. It's the only way to conserve heat. She hesitated, then scrambled inside. I unzipped my heavy parka, shook the snow off, and squeezed in beside her. It was cramped. We were pressed chest to chest, legs intertwined. This isn't romance, I grunted, pulling the hood of the bag tight around us. It's thermodynamics. You're a heat source. I'm a heat source. Apart we freeze. Together we might wake up. She didn't argue. She buried her face in my flannel shirt, her body convulsing with shivers. I wrapped my arms around her, rubbing her back vigorously to generate friction. I told her. Safe. A funny word. We were trapped in a blizzard, hunted by killers, buried under a tree in the middle of nowhere. But for the moment, the world had shrunk to this tiny, dark bubble of warmth. Minutes passed, or maybe hours. The shivering slowly subsided, her breathing leveled out. Quote 167. Her voice was a whisper against my chest. Quote 168. Quote 169. Quote 170. Quote 171. She paused. Quote 172. I lay there, staring into the blackness. I could feel the beat of her heart against mine, she said fiercely. She pulled back slightly, trying to see my face in the dark. Quote 177. Quote 178, I said roughly. Quote 111. Quote 180. Quote 181, I corrected her. Quote 182. Quote 183, she wept softly. Quote 184. The mention of my daughter Masha, or Maya, let's say, Maya for U.S. audience, hit me like a physical pain. Maya was 12 when I went in, I said, my voice thick. She used to think I hung the moon. When I got out, she wouldn't even see me. Her mother told her I was a monster, a murderer. We can fix it, Sarah said. With the drive. When the truth comes out, she'll know. Everyone will know. Maybe, I sighed. Or maybe it's too late. Damage is done. It's never too late, she insisted. She reached up and touched my bearded cheek with a cold hand. You're not a monster, Frank Colton. You're the most decent man I've ever met. I caught her hand and moved it away gently. Go to sleep, Sarah. Save your strength. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. She settled back against me. Okay. Good night, Frank. Good night. She fell asleep quickly, exhausted by the trauma. But I lay awake for a long time, listening to the wind trying to tear our shelter apart. It was strange. For a decade, hate had been my fuel. It kept me warm in the solitary confinement cell. It kept me moving when I built the cabin. I thought hate was the only thing I had left. But lying there, holding the woman who had ruined my life, keeping her warm, I felt the hate starting to crack. It wasn't gone, but it was losing its edge. Maybe the mountain was right. Cold is cold. Survival is survival. The past doesn't matter when the storm is trying to kill you. Only the person next to you matters. I closed my eyes and let the darkness take me. I woke to silence. The howling was gone. The air in the snow cave was stale and cold but breathable. I unzipped the bag. The cold morning air hit us instantly. Up and at 'em, I said, nudging Sarah. She groaned, stiff and sore, but she moved. That was good. I crawled out of the shelter first. The world had been transformed. The storm had dumped 2 feet of fresh snow. The forest was a pristine, blinding white cathedral under a pale yellow sun. It was breathtakingly beautiful and deadly silent. I checked the snowmobile. Buried, but diggable. Help me clear the intake, I told Sarah. We worked in silence for 10 minutes, clearing the snow from the machine. I checked the fuel. 1/4 tank. Enough to get to the highway if we didn't push it. Quote 198, Sarah said, smiling weakly. She looked terrible. Hair matted, face pale, lips chapped. But she was alive. Quote 199, I muttered. I walked a few paces away to relieve myself, scanning the tree line. Habit. Always check your 6. The snow was perfect. Unbroken white velvet, except for one spot. About 300 yards down the slope, near the edge of the ravine, a flock of ravens was circling. They were diving down, then shooting back up, cawing excitedly. Ravens don't circle for no reason. They circle carrion. Or they circle something that is waiting. I narrowed my eyes. The sun glinted off something metal in the trees below the birds. Just a flash. My stomach dropped. Frank, Sarah called out. Ready to go? I turned back to her, keeping my voice low. I get on the sled now. What is it? They didn't stop, I said, sprinting back to the machine. They camped too, and they're closer than I thought. I grabbed the starter cord. Please, baby, don't fail me now. The engine roared to life, but as the echo died away, another sound rolled up the mountain. The sharp, cracking thwip of a high-powered rifle bullet breaking the sound barrier. Snow exploded on the hood of the Skondik, inches from my hand. I yelled, shoving Sarah down behind the windshield. Bullets don't whine like they do in the movies. They snap, It's a sharp, ugly sound like a dry branch breaking right next to your ear, followed by the sonic crack that tells you you're already dead if they aimed right. Snap, snap, crack. The snow around my cowling erupted in white geysers. Quote 208. I roared, grabbing Sarah by the back of her coat and forcing her low behind the windshield. I slammed the throttle wide open. The old Skondik groaned, tracks spinning, then bit into the hardpack. We surged forward, fishtailing wildly. Behind us, two black shapes tore out of the tree line. The mercenaries. They were riding Ski-Doo summits, high-altitude machines fast and nimble. They cut through the deep powder like sharks through water. I didn't try to outrun them on the flat. That was a losing game. "Hold on," I shouted. I yanked the handlebars hard right, driving us straight toward the edge of Dead Man's Drop, a steep, timber-choked ravine that led down to the frozen creek bed. It was suicide terrain. Rocks, hidden stumps, fallen cedars. Exactly what I needed. We went over the lip. The Skondik bucked violently, catching air. We slammed down, suspension bottoming out with a metal clang. Quote 210. Sarah screamed. Quote 211. I lied. I didn't have it. I was surfing a 500-pound sled down a 40-degree slope, dodging trees by inches. Behind us, the mercenaries hesitated, but only for a second. I heard their engines rev as they followed. Brave boys, or greedy. Bang! The impact came out of nowhere. A hidden stump under the snow caught the left ski. The handlebars were ripped from my grip with bone-jarring force. The sled flipped. The world spun. Sky, snow, trees, sky. I hit the ground hard, rolling instinctively to bleed off the momentum. I slammed into a pine trunk, the air rushing out of my lungs. For a moment, there was only ringing in my ears and the taste of copper in my mouth. Frank. Frank. Sarah was crawling toward me through the snow. She had been thrown clear into a soft drift. She looked terrified, face covered in powder but unhurt. I tried to sit up. A lance of white-hot fire shot up my left leg. Ah! I gritted my teeth, looking down. My heavy canvas pants were torn just above the knee. The fabric was already darkening with blood. It wasn't the crash. I'd been hit. A lucky shot during the chase. Sarah gasped, her hands hovering over the wound. I assessed, probing the area. Quote 216. Quote 217. Quote 218, I ordered, unbuckling my belt. Quote 219. She didn't argue. She grabbed the leather belt, wrapped it around my thigh, and cinched it down with a strength I didn't know she had. I groaned, black spots dancing in my vision. Quote 220. I panted. Quote 221. Quote 222. Quote 223. I grabbed the Winchester from the scabbard on the overturned sled. The scope was knocked loose, useless. I tore it off. Iron sights it is, I whispered, pointing up the slope. We could hear the engines idling down. They were moving slowly now, scanning. Quote 225. I hissed. Quote 26. We scrambled, me hopping on one leg, leaning on Sarah, into the hollow beneath a massive fallen cedar. It was a natural bunker, covered in snow, practically invisible. I checked the Winchester. 5 rounds. I checked the Glock 17 I'd taken from the dead Merc. 12 rounds. I told Sarah, my voice low and steady. She looked at me, wide-eyed. Quote 232. We waited. The cold seeped into my wounded leg, turning the burning pain into a dull, throbbing ache. Then footsteps, crunching snow. He came from the left. Camouflage fatigues, white winter oversuit, tactical vest. He was holding an MP5 submachine gun. A professional. He moved cautiously, weapon shouldered, scanning the wreckage of my snowmobile. He saw the blood in the snow. He smiled. He tapped his headset. Quote 233. He tracked the red drops leading away from the sled. He was coming right for us. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I raised the Glock. My hands were steady. Adrenaline is a hell of a drug. He was 10 feet away. 5. He passed the root ball. He was looking ahead at the blood trail leading deeper into the ravine. I didn't shoot. Shooting is loud. It tells the guy on the hill exactly where you are. "Hey," I said. He spun around, eyes wide, but I was already moving. I lunged up from the snow, ignoring the screaming protest of my leg. I didn't fire. I pistol whipped him across the jaw with the heavy polymer frame of the Glock. Crack. He went down like a sack of cement. I was on him instantly, knee on his chest, gun barrel pressed under his chin. I snarled. He froze. He was young, maybe 30, blue eyes filled with shock. I demanded. He stared at me defiantly. I pressed the barrel harder. He spat out. Quote 240, thermal, damn. That meant he could see our heat signatures through the brush. Quote 241, quote 242. The kid smirked. Quote 243, quote 244. I reached into his vest and pulled out his radio. Quote 245, I ordered. Quote 246, quote 247, quote 248. I sighed. Quote 249. I shifted my grip on the pistol, ready to knock him out for good. But the kid was faster than he looked. He bucked his hips, throwing me off balance. His hand went for the knife on his belt. Bang! The shot was deafening in the confined space. The kid slumped back into the snow, a dark hole in the center of his chest. I sat there, breathing hard, the smoke from the Glock curling up into the cold air. Quote 250. Sarah scrambled over to me. She looked at the dead man, then at me. She looked sick. I muttered, holstering the gun. She whispered. She was trembling, but she reached out and helped me sit up. Quote 254. The radio on the dead man's chest crackled. Bravo 2, report, I heard a shot. Bravo 2. I picked up the radio. I looked at the dead kid. I looked at the blood on my leg, and then I looked at the sniper's position on the ridge. I pressed the transmit button. I said, my voice gravel. A pause. Then a cold, amused voice. Quote 258. Quote 259, I challenged. Quote 260. He was right, we were pinned. He had thermal optics and a sniper rifle. If we moved, he'd pick us off. If we stayed, the cold would kill us. I looked at Sarah. She was staring at the dead mercenary's MP5. Do you know how to use that? I asked. She looked up. I went to the range a few times, basic qualification. Good enough. I picked up the submachine gun and checked the magazine. Full. I handed it to her. Here's the plan, I said. He thinks we're trapped. He thinks I'm crippled. You are crippled, Frank. That's our advantage. He expects us to hunker down, so we're going to do the opposite. We're attacking? We're hunting. I struggled to my feet, leaning heavily on a branch I grabbed from the drift. He's watching the crash site. He's watching the heat signatures. So we're going to give him something to look at. I started stripping the outer gear off the dead mercenary. What are you doing? Sarah asked, horrified. Decoy, I grunted. We're going to prop this poor bastard up, put a heat pack in his vest so he glows on the thermal. While the sniper is watching him, I'm going to circle around. On that leg, you can't climb the ridge. Watch me. I looked her in the eye. I need you to stay here. Keep the decoy moving. Pull on a rope. Make it look like we're alive. Can you do that? She looked at the MP5 in her hands. She looked at the bloody snow. Her jaw set. The fear was still there, but something else was overriding it. Anger. Resolve. I can do it, she said. Good girl. I checked the Winchester one last time. Give me 10 minutes. When you hear me shoot, you run for the snowmobile. If I miss, don't wait for me. Frank, go. I turned and limped into the dense timber, moving parallel to the ridge. The hunter was about to become the hunted. Pain is a funny thing. At a certain point, it stops being a signal and becomes a background noise like the hum of a generator or the wind in the trees. You just acknowledge it and keep moving. I dragged my left leg up the steep slope, digging the toes of my good boot into the frozen crust. Every step was a battle. My breath came in ragged gasps, steaming in the frigid air. Below me in the ravine, I could see the setup. The dead mercenary, propped up against the log, looked eerily alive in the shadows. Sarah was hidden behind the root ball, pulling the paracord I'd tied to the corpse's arm. Twitch. Twitch. From a distance, through thermal optics, it would look like an injured man trying to adjust his position. I reached the crest of the ridge. I was sweating despite the cold, a bad sign. Shock was creeping in. I packed a handful of snow against the back of my neck to stay sharp. I scanned the tree line. There. 70 yards away, nestled between two boulders, was a white shape. If I hadn't been looking for it, I would have missed it completely. A ghillie suit, winter pattern. The long black barrel of a suppressed sniper rifle poked out, aimed down into the ravine. He was focused on the decoy, hook, line, and sinker. I braced the Winchester against a pine trunk. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to breathe. Inhale, exhale, pause. Down in the ravine, the sniper fired. Foot. The dead mercenary jerked violently as the bullet slammed into the vest. The sniper racked the bolt, preparing for a follow-up shot. He thought he had me. "Hey!" I shouted. It was a stupid move tactically, but I needed him to turn. I needed to see his face. I needed him to know who beat him. The white shape spun around. He was fast. The rifle swung toward me, but I was already squeezed. Boom! The 30-30 roared. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around like a rag doll. He dropped the rifle and fell back into the snow, clutching his arm. I didn't wait. I limped toward him, racking the lever. Clack, clack. He was scrambling backward, trying to reach for a sidearm with his good hand. Quote 283. I warned, aiming at his chest. He froze. He was a big man, red hair cropped close, a jagged scar running down his cheek. I recognized the type. Ex-military, probably special forces gone freelance for the paycheck. A man who killed for money, not country. I rasped, closing the distance. Quote 285. He looked at me, then at the blood spreading on his white snowsuit. He laughed, a wet, gurgling sound. Quote 286. Quote 287. I kicked his pistol away. Quote 288. Quote 289. I stepped on his wounded shoulder. He screamed, arching his back. Quote 290. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Quote 291. He looked into my eyes and saw that I wasn't bluffing. The arrogance drained out of him, replaced by the primal fear of a predator who suddenly realizes he's prey. He gasped. I reached down and pulled out a ruggedized iridium satellite phone. The Holy Grail. No cell towers needed, I ordered, holding the screen to his face. He punched in the code with trembling fingers. The screen lit up. Signal. 3 bars. I checked the call log. Last call. 40 minutes ago. Quote 295. I hit the dial button. It rang once, twice. Quote 296. A voice answered, crisp, impatient. Sheriff Bull Higgins, or maybe Zubarev. It didn't matter. It was the voice of the man who signed the checks. I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence hang for a second. Quote 297. Quote 298, I said. Silence, heavy and thick. Quote 299. Quote 300. Quote 301. Quote 32. I agreed. Quote 33. Quote 34. Higgins snarled. Quote 305. Quote 306, I said, looking at the vast, empty wilderness around me. Quote 37. I ended the call. I looked down at Red. He was pale, shivering. He wheezed. I looked at him. I remembered Pete Reynolds bleeding out on a dirty floor. I remembered 8 years of staring at concrete walls. I said. I turned and walked away. I didn't kill him. I didn't have to. The mountain would decide his fate. Maybe he'd crawl out. Maybe he wouldn't. That was between him and God. I made my way back down the slope. It was easier going down, but my leg was on fire. I stumbled, fell, got up again. Sarah met me halfway. She had abandoned the hiding spot when she heard the shot. She saw the phone in my hand and burst into tears. "You got it," she sobbed. "You actually got it." "Make the call," I said, shoving the phone into her hands. My vision was tunneling. The edges of the world were turning gray. "Call your general. Call the cavalry." She dialed with frantic fingers. "Peter? Peter, it's Sarah. Sarah Miller, don't hang up, listen to me. Protocol 01. I have the package, I have the witness. We are in the Frank Church Wilderness, Sector 4. Yes, we're alive, but we need extraction. Now." She listened, nodding, tears streaming down her face, frozen by the wind. Okay, we'll mark the LZ. Sarah out." She lowered the phone and looked at me. A smile broke through the grime and blood on her face. "They're coming," she said. "A Black Hawk from the National Guard base in Boise. 40 minutes, Frank, we did it." "Good," I whispered. "That's good." The adrenaline dump hit me then. The invisible string that was holding me upright suddenly snapped. My knees buckled. "Frank!" She caught me before I hit the snow. We collapsed together. She was shouting something, but her voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. "Stay with me, Frank, look at me." I looked up at the sky. It was a brilliant, piercing blue, not a cloud in sight. "I'm tired, Sarah," I murmured. "Just gonna rest my eyes for a minute." No sleeping. Talk to me." She was slapping my cheeks, shaking my shoulders. "Tell me about your daughter. Tell me about Maya. What's her favorite color, Frank?" "Blue," I breathed, "like the sky." I thought about the letter I would write her. "Dear Maya, I didn't kill anyone. I tried to be a good man." I felt Sarah pressing her hands against my leg, trying to stop the bleeding. Her tears were hot on my face. Strange. The woman who put me in prison was now the only thing keeping me anchored to the earth. Quote 329, she fiercely whispered. Quote 330. Quote 331. The sound of rotors. Did I imagine it? Or was it just the blood rushing in my ears? Thump, thump, thump. Faint, distant, but getting louder. Quote 332. Sarah screamed, pointing at the horizon. Quote 333. I forced my heavy eyelids open, a dark speck against the sun, growing larger, the cavalry. I closed my eyes again, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. Peace. Spring arrived late in the high country. It usually does. I sat on the newly repaired porch of my cabin, watching the last patches of snow retreat into the shadows of the tree line. The creek, frozen silent for 5 months, was now a roaring torrent of white water, fed by the melt. The air smelled of wet earth, pine needles, and possibilities. My legs still ached when the pressure dropped. The doctors at St. Patrick's Hospital in Missoula said I was lucky to keep it. The bullet had missed the femoral artery by a millimeter. I walked with a cane now, a sturdy piece of hickory I'd carved myself. But I walked. That was enough. The month in the hospital was a blur of sterile white walls, beeping machines, and suits. So many suits. Federal agents, lawyers, journalists trying to sneak past the nurses, but the only visitor I allowed in was Sarah. She came every day. At first, she just sat there while I drifted in and out of morphine sleep. Later, when the fog cleared, she brought me coffee, the real stuff, not hospital sludge, and news. And the news was good. General Pete Anderson kept his word. The morning after the extraction, A convoy of FBI SUVs and National Guard trucks rolled into the county seat. They didn't knock. I watched it on the TV in my hospital room. Sheriff Bull Higgins being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs, his face gray and sagging, stripped of his cigar and his swagger. Judge Reynolds, State Senator Vance, the deputies, the whole Founders Club crumbled like a house of cards. The flash drive was the nail in their coffin, but Sarah's testimony was the hammer. 43 cases were reopened. 43 men and women framed to cover up the club's crimes were exonerated. I was one of them. Vacated with prejudice. That's what the legal paper said. It meant I was innocent. Officially. The state of Montana issued a formal apology. They offered a settlement check with a lot of zeros on it. Enough to buy a house in Missoula, a new truck, maybe a condo in Florida. I took the check. But I didn't buy the condo, I didn't buy the house. I bought a new snowmobile. I bought supplies, enough for 2 winters. And I came back here. People called me crazy. Why go back to the place where you almost died? They asked. You're a hero, Mr. Colton. Write a book. Go on talk shows. I told them to go to hell. I didn't want fame. I didn't want the noise. I wanted the silence. I took a sip of my coffee and listened to a stellar jay scolding a squirrel in the pines. A sound cut through the peace. An engine. Not a snowmobile this time, but a car struggling up the muddy logging road. A battered Jeep Wrangler emerged from the trees, splattered with mud up to the roof. It pulled up to the cabin and the engine died with a shudder. The driver's door opened. Sarah stepped out. She looked different. No tailored suits, no city coat. She was wearing jeans, work boots, and a flannel shirt. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. You're hard to find, Frank, she said, leaning against the doorframe. That's the point, I replied. Coffee? Please. She walked up the steps and sat on the bench opposite me. We drank in silence for a while, watching the clouds drift over the peaks. I resigned for real this time, she said finally. The governor offered me the district attorney job. I turned it down. Why? Can't fix the system from the inside if the foundation is rotten. I'm opening a private practice, pro bono work, helping guys like you used to be. Wrongful convictions. I nodded. Good. You'll be good at that. She turned the mug in her hands. I came to bring you the final paperwork. Your record is clean, Frank. Not just expunged, erased. It's like it never happened. It happened, I said, tapping my bad leg with the cane. Paper doesn't change history. No, it doesn't. She took a deep breath. And I came to say, properly this time, I am sorry. Not for saving my life, but for breaking yours. I looked at her. 10 years of hatred. It was a heavy load to carry, a backpack full of stones. And sitting there in the spring sunshine, I realized I had set it down somewhere on that mountain during the storm. You know, I said slowly, I spent a lot of nights in that cell planning how I'd hurt you. I thought revenge would taste sweet. And now? Now I realize revenge is just poison. You drink it hoping the other person dies. I looked her in the eye. We're square, Sarah. You gave me the truth. I gave you a second chance. Don't waste it. She smiled and tears welled up in her eyes. I won't. She stood up. I should go. The road is treacherous. Drive safe. She walked back to the Jeep, then stopped and turned around. Frank, did you write the letter? I stiffened. Yeah, I wrote it. Did you send it? It's in the outgoing mail pile next time I go to town. She nodded, got in the Jeep, and drove away. I watched her go until the taillights disappeared into the forest. That evening, by the light of the kerosene lamp, I took the envelope off the mantel. Maya Colton, Seattle, Washington. I opened it and read it one last time. Dear Maya, this is your father. I know you probably don't want to read this. I know you were told I was a bad man. For a long time, the law said I was too. But the law was wrong. I didn't kill anyone. I was framed. The people who did it are in jail now. That doesn't change the fact that I wasn't there. I missed your graduation. I missed your life. I can't buy that time back. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking to be your dad again. I just want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a single day. When I was in the dark, thinking about you was the only light I had. I live in the mountains now. It's quiet here. If you ever want to know the truth, or if you just want to see where I am, the door is unlocked. Love, Dad. I sealed the envelope. Tomorrow I'd take it to the trading post. Maybe she'd answer, maybe she wouldn't. That was out of my hands. All I could do was send it. I blew out the lamp and lay down on the cot. That night I had a dream. I was standing on the bank of a river. The water was clear and cold. On the other side stood Pete Reynolds. He looked young, healthy, no bullet holes in his chest. My parents were there too. They were smiling. They waved. I took a step toward the water, wanting to cross. Pete shook his head. "Not yet, Frank," he seemed to say. "You've got work to do." I woke up just before dawn. The sky was turning a soft purple in the east. I got up, stoked the stove, and stepped out onto the porch. The air was sharp. The mountains stood like silent sentinels, jagged teeth against the sky. They say the mountains don't forgive weakness. That's true, they don't. But they are honest. If you are cold, they freeze you. If you are stupid, they kill you. But if you respect them, if you listen to them, they give you something the city never can. They give you yourself. For 8 years, I was inmate number 4821. I was a murderer. I was a victim. I was a ghost. But out here, I'm just a man. I looked at the spot where I had found Sarah in the snow. If I had walked past her, if I had listened to the hate, I would be a free man legally, but I would be in a prison of my own making for the rest of my life. I chose to save her, and in doing so, I saved myself. Hate is a cage. Forgiveness is the key. It doesn't mean you forget. It doesn't mean you condone. It just means you open the door and walk out. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. My name is Frank Colton. I am 54 years old. I have a bad leg, a good rifle, and a clean conscience. And for the first time in a decade, I am free.